Following a meeting between myself, the Commission's legal team, and various counsel representing parties who have filed applications for permission to cross-examine certain witnesses, I give the following directions in relation to those applications as agreed to among counsel for all concerned who were present at the meeting. The directions are the following. 1, counsel on all sides will file their written submissions with the Secretary of the Commission tomorrow at 10 a.m. I just emphasize that they are to be filed with the Secretary of the Commission. 2, subject to 3 below, the applications which have been filed will be heard on Wednesday this week at 10 a.m. 3, the date for the hearing of these applications is likely to remain Wednesday at 10 a.m., but may be moved to Thursday this week, depending on what transpires in communications between the Commission's legal team and counsel for Mr. Jonas and for Ms. Mentor with regard to whether or not they wish to be or want to be present when the applications are heard. 4, the Commission's legal team will inform me by 12 noon tomorrow as to what will have transpired in their discussions with counsel for the 2 witnesses, so as to enable me to indicate whether the date of Wednesday remains for the hearing of the applications or whether the hearing is moved to Thursday. Those, therefore, are the directions, unless counsel thinks there is something I've left out that I should have included. Mr. Malega?
Chair, can we mention that the directions in 3 and 4 also accommodate the legal representatives of Mr. Maseko?
Oh, okay. The directions in 3 and 4 will include the legal representatives of Mr. Maseko. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Have I covered everything, Mr. Helens?
Yes, we were going to make the Maseko comment, but now it's complete.
Okay, thank you. That then is how we dispose of the applications or matters relating to the applications for now. We will then I'm then ready that we resume the evidence of Ms. Williams.
Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you. One sec, Lerato. Where's my bench book? Yes, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, before we continue with the evidence of Ms. Williams, there's one matter of housekeeping that I require to update the Chair on. Chair, that relates to the SMS correspondence that Ms. Williams received in the course of the evidence on Friday.
Yes.
We would like to inform the Chair that we have received an affidavit from Mr. Manyi. It came in the latter part of yesterday. That was the 2nd of September. There is an ongoing investigation by the Commission's investigators, and I understand the report is being prepared by the investigators.
Yes.
And so it is our proposal that that report be completed, that Mr. Manyi's affidavit be included within that report, and that that be furnished in due course to the Chair as soon as it is ready, in order for the implications of the SMS correspondence for the processes of the Commission to be dealt with.
Okay, that's in order. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I may then return to Ms. Williams's evidence. Ms. Williams, just to pick up on an aspect that we addressed on Friday, which related to a potential difference between your evidence and that of Mr. Maseko regarding the date on which he was removed from GCIS. Chair, you will recall that in the course of that engagement with Ms. Williams, I undertook to go back to the transcript to clarify precisely what Mr. Maseko had said in relation to those dates. And for your benefit and that of Ms. Williams, I would just like to give you the reference. Chair, the relevant part of the transcript is in the transcript of the 30th of August, 2018, and it appears at page 40 of that transcript. And it runs at various points on that page. And rather than read it, what I will do is just summarize the nub of the evidence. What Mr. Maseko testified to was that he'd received the call initially from Minister Chabani on the 30th of January, which was a Sunday. He had then met with him on the Monday, which was the 31st of January. And his actual removal and its notification to the public happened at a cabinet meeting and thereafter media statement by Minister Chabani on Wednesday, the 2nd of February. Ms. Williams, you'll recall it was his reference to February that I raised with you in your evidence, because your statement had said that the removal happened on or about January 2011. Do you have a comment on that date in relation to the clarity that we now have from Mr. Maseko's evidence?
Chairperson, I did go and verify the facts. It's true that the address by Mr. Maseko and Mr. Manyi subsequently was on the 2nd of February, and I would concur with that.
Thank you, Ms. Williams.
I'm sorry, she says the address.
The addressing of the management meeting.
Oh.
Remember, I indicated that Mr. Maseko came in that mid-morning, which I wasn't certain of the time.
Yes.
However, I wasn't, my affidavit was indicating that it was around January.
Yes.
Now, what I have since established that it did take place, but it was on the 2nd, and also the subsequent arrival of Mr. Manyi, it was on the 2nd later in the day.
Okay, I think what confused me is the reference to the address. I think when we talk about the departure of Mr. Maseko from the department and Mr. Manyi's arrival, that's what we were talking about, I think. You say that day when Mr. Maseko departed from the department and when Mr. Manyi arrived, you now say that date is in terms of the version given by Mr. Maseko.
Certainly, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Williams, if I may then ask you in Exhibit F1 to go to your statement at page 7, as that is where we left off on Friday. Ms. Williams, you'll recall that when we left off on Friday, we were discussing the ruling that you'd received from the Public Service Commission. That is referenced at paragraph 26 on page 7. But at the time that we adjourned on Friday, we were dealing with the actual content of that ruling. And so if I may ask you to go to page 56 of the papers, which is the 12th page of that ruling from the Public Service Commission. And just to orientate ourselves in your evidence, Ms. Williams, as I understand the position, the ruling from the Public Service Commission was a product of a grievance that you raised with them in relation to the fact that you had, in your acting position as Cabinet spokesperson, been in a position on a level 16 for more than 6 weeks, and as a consequence of that had sought remuneration commensurate with that position. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
And you took up the issue with the Public Service Commission, as I understand your evidence, when Minister Mutambi refused to remunerate you on level 16. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chair.
We dealt with some of the findings of the Public Service Commission on Friday, but what appears at page 56 is really the conclusion of their finding in relation to your grievance in relation to level 16. If you go 2/3 of the way down in that paragraph 29.8, you will see that the ruling records, taking into consideration that Ms. Williams had been performing the role of Cabinet spokesperson, which should be performed by the Director General of GCIS, it is accepted that she performed on level 16. Furthermore, both Ministers Radebe and Mutambi signed the performance agreement of Ms. Williams reflecting the salary level as 16, thereby contracting to her performance on that salary level. Ms. Williams, what did the Public Service Commission conclude, therefore, in relation to that finding?
Chairperson, the conclusion was that, indeed, whilst working as an acting Cabinet spokesperson, I was on level 16 and therefore should be compensated accordingly.
Ms. Hofmeyer, unless the idea is that some of these details show that, for example, certain people did certain things because of anything connected with either state capture or corruption and fraud. It would seem to me that some of these might be quite important to a particular witness, but might not really be relevant or significant for purposes of the commission. So I just want to make sure that you keep an eye on that. You know, obviously, if in the end the argument is going to be that the failure, for example, by Ms. Mutambi or whoever to make sure that she was paid at the correct rate shows a certain motive that's relevant for our terms of reference, the detail would not be relevant.
Indeed, Chair.
Yes.
If I may address that pertinently, because there has been aspects of Ms. Williams' evidence which on their face do not directly relate to the questions that the Chair has posed. But I would like to address it, if I may, because You'll recall that my learned leader, Mr. Maleka, explained at the beginning of his introduction to the term of reference 1.6 that we were going to receive evidence first from Mr. Maseko, who was going to speak directly to his removal from the position of head of GCIS, and then to be followed by the evidence of Ms. Williams, who was going to speak as the person who has been in that institution, I would suspect for the longest time, of how that institution was carried forward after Mr. Maseko's departure, and particularly how that institution thereafter facilitated payments of advertising spend for national departments to the Gupta-linked media entities of TNA Media, etc. So that is where Ms. Williams, in the chronology, is placed in her evidence. But, Chair, we submit that the details of the management of GCIS is more generally relevant to the terms of reference of this commission. And if I may just direct the Chair to some of the evidence that we received from the experts on Friday afternoon. Ms. Williams, I'm not sure that you remained for that evidence. Did you stay?
No.
It will be relevant because I would actually ask for you to comment on this in due course in your evidence. But one of the important points that were made by those experts, Dr. Hellman and Dr. Kaufman, is that one of the ways in which, in their research over the better part of 20 years into the phenomenon of state capture, that it takes place in a society is when institutions are denuded of their efficiency and where the governance of those institutions is undermined. It is in the context of that damage to the institutions of a state that the ground for state capture is made available and becomes fertile. And, Chair, in due course, not through Ms. Williams, but in due course, we will address the Chair on precisely the institutional deficiencies that have occurred across the board of the institutions in our state and the governance that has been undermined, provided we can show that that links to the state capture, corruption and fraud, which are the main focus of the Commission. So, Chair, with your leave at this point, we are seeking simply to get the detail of what happened to the institution of GCIS after Mr. Maseko left, after Mr. Manyi came in, after he was replaced by Mr. Dipoko, and under the stewardship of Minister Mutambi. We will glean those facts as we have from Ms. Williams, and we will look at the question of whether the governance of that institution was undermined in a manner that facilitated payments to Gupta-linked entities that were otherwise untoward.
Okay, no, that's fine. As long as you keep an eye on relevance and significance.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed, Chair, we intend to do so.
Thank you.
So, Ms. Williams, there is a ruling that you should be paid at level 16. What happened? Were you paid at that level?
Chairperson, I was not paid.
And then if you go to page 57, there is furthermore a ruling from the Public Service Commission at paragraph 31.4 that the filling of the post of Director General of GCIS must receive priority, and the Public Service Commission must be informed of the finalization thereof. And they make reference earlier to the period of 6 months in terms of which their circular required that position to be filled. Did that take place?
No, Chairperson, the post was not filled.
If we can then return to your statement, Ms. Williams, at page 8.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer.
Yes.
That letter from the Commission is dated 1 February 2016.
That's correct, Chair.
Now, that post wasn't filled up to the time that you were appointed, or are you still acting? I can't remember anymore now. Are you still acting?
I'm still acting, Chairperson.
So that post remains unfilled.
Yes, Chairperson.
Thank you.
Chair, if we may just assist, we are now in February 2016. At that stage, Ms. Williams, what position did you hold in GCIS?
2016, I would have to check.
If you go back, and I may be of assistance, I don't regard this as being contentious. As I have it, you were acting cabinet spokesperson, but
that's
you were
correct.
no longer acting DG. You had returned to your position as Deputy Director General. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson. I was still the acting cabinet spokesperson at that time.
And who was holding the position of acting DG of GCIS at that time?
It was Mr. Donald Dipuka.
Thank you. Insofar as the failure on the part of Minister Mutambi to follow the recommendation of the Public Service Commission to pay you at level 16, do you know why that recommendation was not implemented by the minister?
Chairperson, I have no idea, because my understanding was that the Public Service Commission is an institution that actually would give a ruling, and a political principal should actually adhere to the recommendation.
And the further recommendation that the post of Director General of GCIS finally be filled, because on the chronology as I have it until this point, since Mr. Maseko left in February 2011, there had been no appointment of a Director General of GCIS. Do you have insight as to why no steps were taken on the part of the Minister to advertise and fill that position finally?
Just to correct, I think the post became vacant when Mr. Manyi left, which was August 2012.
Correct.
But I have no idea why it has not been filled.
So that post has remained vacant for about 6 years. That's very strange. That's very strange. For 6 years. Sure.
Ms. Williams,
Yeah.
what does that do to an institution such as GCIS, to have that failure to fill a position at the head of the institution?
Chairperson, my understanding is that the Public Finance Management Act does provide that a department must have an accounting officer. And the implication indeed is that you have an institution that has an acting person who has not been appointed, and necessarily you don't have a full-time accounting officer as prescribed by the PFMA. So it does have an impact in terms of the leadership of that institution.
Well, you have acted in the position and you have been Deputy Director General for a number of years at GCIS. Does the post of Director General of GCIS require any skills or expertise that is difficult to find in the country?
Chairperson, my understanding is that I don't think it's a specialized, it's a post that you require a person with good governance and the communication skill and understanding of the policies of the department. So in my view, it's not a scarce skill. I think, Chairperson, if I may say, I think what was even particularly frustrating is the fact that even when you are acting, you then get bullied throughout the process, almost rendering, even with you having the capacity to perform, you then continuously get bullied, that you almost finding it difficult to perform.
Well, you have been DG for some time and you have been within government for many years, and you have acted as DG as well. Would the president be unaware that, for example, there is a department that has had no DG for many years? Is that something you are able to say, or is that something you are not able to say?
Chairperson, I'm able to say it for the simple reason that year in and year out, the Auditor General has been raising concern about it. And it was continuously raised with the relevant minister who was in place at that time. It was raised with Minister Mtambi, it was raised with the previous minister, so I am aware that it is something that was continuously raised by the Auditor General.
But you don't know to what extent a president would be unaware of a vacant position of a DG if it continues for a long time.
Chairperson, my understanding is that the president of the country should be aware, for a simple reason that as a cabinet spokesperson, you sit in cabinet, you continuously are addressed as an acting. So my understanding is that the president was very much aware that there was no Director General of the GCIS.
Thank you, Chair. If I may just pick up this point in relation to the regulations that govern GCIS, because it is again a feature of what happened after Mr. Maseko's departure from GCIS and the manner in which it was managed for a period of 6 or so years thereafter. Could I ask you to go to page 163 of the papers? Chair and Ms. Williams, this is a portion of the Public Service Commission regulations.
I'm sorry, what page did you say?
163. Just to orientate you, Ms. Williams, the Public Service Regulations of 2016 begin at page 94 of the papers, and I've directed you to a particular page within those regulations at page 163. If you flip back a page at page 162, you will see that that is the regulation dealing with advertising of posts within the public service. And if you go over the page to regulation 65 sub 7, you will see there the stipulation that a funded vacant post shall be advertised within 6 months after becoming vacant and shall be filled within 12 months after becoming vacant. Now, Ms. Williams, before I ask for your comment on that, Chair, just to satisfy you, the preceding regulations, which were in place prior to 2016, had a similar provision. They are published in Government Gazette 703/22, in Notice R111 of the 8th of February 2018. But the equivalent provision can be found there. So it operated throughout the period that we are concerned with. Ms. Williams, is that your understanding of the position of the public service, that these positions must be advertised within 6 months and must be filled within 12?
That's my understanding, Chairperson. I think that's why I was saying that the Auditor General has been consistently raising a finding around this matter.
Has the Auditor General's report raising this matter been simply ignored, as far as you know?
What I know is that the post has not been filled, Chairperson.
Yes.
And the political principals that were responsible at the time, they are aware of the report that was raised by the Auditor General.
Yes. Now you are acting in the position. Are you privy to any reasons or explanations why, as of today, the post has not been advertised?
I am not privy, Chair.
And as far as you know, and you ought to know, being the acting DG, are there any plans in place to have the post advertised anytime soon?
Chairperson, I wouldn't really speak on that. I'm not aware of.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Williams, before we move to the next topic of your evidence, I'd like to ask for your comment on page 70 of your 70.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer, to interrupt. Let me just finish something that's connected with my last question. During your acting period as DG now, what happens to your position of Deputy Director General, is there somebody else acting in that position, and is it somebody who is within GCIS, or is it somebody from outside? In other words, what is the impact on the functioning of the department of the fact that this post has not been filled and you have to act in that post, and then maybe somebody else must act in your position? I don't know whether somebody else must act in that other person's position and somebody else must act in that other person's position. What is the position?
Chairperson, if I can just take a step back, when I was moved back to be the acting cabinet spokesperson, one of my letters to the minister in accepting, I had indicated that if she could appoint somebody in the corporate services as a DDG. Now, for that duration, nobody was giving leadership in that branch up until my acting was stopped. Currently, the current minister has appointed me as an acting cabinet acting director general, but she has also appointed an acting DDG in that. However, the chief director for the human resources is doubling up. There's no one who has been appointed because he has moved, Mr. Smakane has moved to the position that I had, but then we can't appoint a person because it is a funded chief director post. So the person is doubling up in that area.
Thank you.
Ms. Williams, in relation to that last answer, what is the impact on the morale of the institution of GCIS with this moving and doubling up and uncertainty as to the filling of formal positions?
Chairperson, if I may just say that the damage that was done by the Minister Mthambi, for a very long time, GCIS was called a Hollywood place, because a lot of people, when they resigned, and I should indicate that one of the other things that Minister Mthambi did, took over the powers of appointing people. When the post becomes vacant, it has to be at her whims whether she fills the post or not. So from directors, we had a lot of directors that were vacant. We had a lot of chief directors that were vacant. All the DDGs that were there had left. And basically the institution was becoming completely dysfunctional. The current the next minister who took over, Minister Dlodlo, credit to her, she managed to fill those posts because most of the directors that had left, she just didn't fill them. So the Minister Dlodlo, who then came, fast-tracked filling those posts, but up till now, we still don't have the DDGs, but the chief directors and the directors were then filled by the next minister, which was Minister Ayanda Dlodlo.
And just to get our chronology clear, Ms. Williams, can I clarify? You were demoted, as I have it from the chronology, from the position of acting DG in October 2014, and that is the date on which Mr. Dipoko took over from you as acting DG. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And that position persisted, as I have it from your chronology, until April 2017, where you were placed back in the acting position by the current Minister Dlodlo. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So from the period October 2014 to April 2017, Mr. Dipoko was in that position as acting head of GCIS, and you were in a Deputy Director General position. Is that correct?
At some point, I was a Deputy Director General, then I was appointed as an acting cabinet spokesperson.
Indeed, but without ever reassuming the position of Director General of GCIS. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
Thank you. I then asked Ms. Williams that you turn to page 70 of the papers, of Exhibit F1, which is your bundle. It's part of the theme that we're exploring at the moment with you, Ms. Williams, what the role of the head of an institution like GCIS entails, and how the failure to fill that position impacted on the institution. Page 70 is a section of the Public Service Act, and you will see in the middle of the page, under subsection 7(3)(b), the roles of the head of department of a national department are set out there. I'd like to go through them with you and with reference to them, invite your comment on the impact of this period where there was no formal head of GCIS in the position. You'll see that section 7(3)(b) says, subject to the provisions of paragraph C and D, which are not pertinent for present purposes, a head of a department shall be responsible for the efficient management and administration of his or her department, including the effective utilization and training of staff, the maintenance of discipline, the promotion of sound labor relations, and the proper use and care of state property, and he or she shall perform the functions that may be prescribed. Can you tell us with comment on those sections what the impact was on the GCIS?
Chairperson, if I may describe the situation at the time, I think the organization was working on auto, precisely because we were fortunate that we have an organization of very, very dedicated public servants. They knew their work and they were actually doing the work as committed public servant. If you were asking me whether were they getting any strategic direction from the head, I would say no. There was no strategic leadership at all whatsoever.
Thank you. If we may then return to page 8 of the Exhibit F1. You will see at the top of that page, at paragraph 27, you record the fact that Minister Mutambi never implemented the Public Service Commission's recommendations, and you go on to say, instead, she reversed my responsibilities as Cabinet spokesperson in April 2016, and she directed that you revert back to your previous portfolio. What portfolio was that?
Chairperson, that portfolio is the portfolio that I left to be the acting cabinet spokesperson, and in April, she then wrote me a letter to say, revert back to your role as the Deputy Director General of Corporate Services.
Ms. Williams, you take up at paragraph 28 on that page, steps that you took in the face of that conduct by Minister Mutambi. Please could you tell the Chair about those steps?
Chairperson, at that point, because clearly I think Minister Mutambi, that was in April, and the letter from the Public Service Commission had been given to us as early as February, and she was not interested in implementing the recommendations. I then took up the matter with the President because the report I was made to believe by the Public Service Commission has also been sent to the President because the Minister was accountable to the President. I then made an effort to communicate with the President with a view of requesting his intervention that I be compensated for the period that I was acting.
And what was the President's response?
In this second round, he never gave me the appointment.
And just to go back to a question that the Chair asked you earlier, the Chair queried whether, to your knowledge, Minister Mutambi's failure to fill the vacant post of head of GCIS was brought to the President's attention, or her requirement in terms of the Public Service Commission ruling to do so within 6 months of February 2016. To your knowledge, did the ruling of the Public Service Commission go to the President for his consideration?
I was advised by the Public Service Commission that a copy was sent to me, another copy was sent to the Minister, and another copy was sent to the President.
Thank you. If we can then return to paragraph 29 on page 8. Ms. Williams, in paragraphs 29 and 30, you talk about the next change that occurred to your responsibilities within GCIS after you were instructed by Minister Mutambi to resume the position of Deputy Director General. Please can you tell us about that further change that occurred in August 2016?
Chairperson, when I went back to my portfolio that I was hired to do, that was in April. And one morning I get to the office and I find another letter. And this time it was a letter that was informing me that the minister has directed Mr. Dipoko to take most of my functions as the Deputy Director General. Yeah.
Where were they taken?
The functions were taken to the Director General, who was acting at the time.
That would be Mr. Dipoko.
Mr. Dipoko, yes.
If we could go to that letter, it's at page 39 of Exhibit F1. Can you confirm that this is an internal memo from Mr. Dipoko to yourself dated the 1st of August 2016? Apologies, it's page 39.
39, yeah, that's right.
Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
And you received this?
I received this,
If we can
Chairperson.
go to paragraph 1, Mr. Dipoko records that in line with the Treasury regulations, clauses 2.1.2 and 3.2.9 issued in terms of the PFMA, he records the minister directed the acting director general that the below-mentioned functions must report directly to the office of the accounting officer. I'd like to look at that in some detail. Let's begin with who occupied the office of accounting officer at that time in GCIS.
The accounting officer at the time was Mr. Dipoko.
Right, then I'd like us to focus on his recordal that the minister has directed, as I understand it, him, Mr. Dipoko, to do certain things. What do you make of the minister's direction to Mr. Dipoko that there must be some rearrangement within the functions of GCIS?
Chairperson, my understanding of the PFMA, the minister doesn't get involved in the running of the department. That in itself was odd to me. For the accounting officer to say he is acting on an instruction on something that should have belonged to him, but he then says that the minister is saying, this is what I should instruct you to do, was a bit almost wrong, Chairperson.
And then if we go on to understand the content of that instruction, the instruction was that, and I quote, the below-mentioned functions must report directly to the office of the accounting officer. And then listed first in the sub-paragraph is the chief financial officer. Who was that at the time in GCIS?
The chief financial officer, Chairperson, was Mr. Mzwanele Manyi.
And can I ask about the processes in place in August 2016 when you received this internal memorandum? What was the process for the chief financial officer to report to the acting director general in the period prior to this memo being received by yourself? Were they engaging? Weren't they? If they were, what was the relevant regularity of that engagement?
My understanding, Chairperson, of the role of the CFO as provided for in the public financial management is that the CFO should be accountable to the accounting officer, which is the DG, not report necessarily. And what used to happen in our case was that the accounting officer at all time had a line of sight of the CFO through a monthly budget committee meeting, which he chairs, the DG chairs. This is what was happening during Mr. Joel Nechitenze. This is how it was happening during Themba Maseko. And this is how it was happening also with Mr. Manyi. The DG is receiving reports on a monthly basis in a setting of the budget committee from the chief financial officer. So there was never any stage where the chief financial officer is not reporting the expenditure of the department to the accounting officer.
So, at a practical level, what change would this direction of the minister bring about then?
Chairperson, what it meant, and I will list them, I hope I remember all of them. It meant the cleaners report to the Director General. It meant the security.
I'm sorry?
The cleaners were reporting directly to the Director General because that whole portfolio was reporting under a CFO because we were a small department. So when they took that function, it therefore meant the cleaners were reporting to the Director General, the registry was reporting to the Director General, the supply chain, which was the procurement, was reporting to the salaries, were reporting to the DG, the transport services was reporting to the DG, the auxiliary service, the asset management, all of that was just directly reporting to the Director General, which is why I was saying that the bulk of the work of the Deputy Director General was removed under the guise of this Treasury regulation.
So the Chief Financial Officer's office, if that's what one can call it, has a number of components, is that right, or sections?
Certainly, Chairman.
And those are the ones you were mentioning.
Yes.
You are saying that this direction recorded in Mr. Dipogo's letter at page 39, or memo, internal memo at page 39, meant what you have just said as far as you understood it.
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
And Ms. Williams, if I may just clarify, prior to this internal memo, who was overseeing those functions?
It was myself, Chairperson.
For want of a better description, a middle management level.
I was a middle manager. I was a Deputy Director General responsible for that whole corporate services portfolio, which included the CFO.
And just to clarify further, before this internal memo, there was, I think in your words, a line of sight consistently between the Chief Financial Officer and the Director General. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
That happened consistently, and despite that, in August 2016, there was an instruction from Minister Mutambi that those aspects which you had formerly been responsible for as Deputy Director General now exclude you and report directly to the then acting Director General, Mr. Lipoko. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairperson.
If we can then return to page 8 of your statement.
I'm sorry, Ms. Hofmeyer. Before you received this internal memo from Mr. Dipoko, was there any process in terms of which you were engaged either by the minister or Mr. Dipoko to say it was felt there was a need to effect this change, and what was your view and so on?
Chairperson, I did raise precisely those issues because in my understanding, you don't just wake up one morning and you change and you don't engage the people who are concerned. I was never consulted. The sections that were moving, they just woke up one morning and were told that they are no longer. So there was no consultation, hence my elevating my grievance on this matter.
And this was not at the time when you were acting spokesperson, government spokesperson, and you had asked that somebody else should take care of your position.
That's correct, Chairperson. I was back in my position as the Deputy Director General.
Yes. And what were you left with after the implementation of this direction from Minister Mutambi in terms of your responsibilities?
I was left with human resources administration, and I was left with human resource development, strategic planning, and the IT. You must have asked for a reason why this change was made. If you did ask, what reason were you given? First, I wrote a letter, Chairperson, to the Minister, and to try and raise those issues to say, I mean, there should have been a process. The starting, as I recall, the starting line was that I thought you have left. I'm surprised you are still there because I was told you have left. And in any case, it's my right I have instructed, and it is my right as a minister.
Or I guess maybe something you're still going to come to.
Indeed, Chair. If I
Okay.
may take us to that correspondence, because I
Okay.
think it will assist
Yes,
with
just
the-
before you do that, Ms. Williams, I see that internal memo from Mr. Tipuko is dated 19 August 2016, but paragraph 4 of the memo says that the implementation of the direction or directive, he calls it, was to be with effect from 1 August 2016. Do you know whether the reason why on the 19th August 2016, Mr. Tipuko said this change would occur with effect from 1 August 2016, about close to 3 weeks previously, retrospectively? Do you know why that was, or whether that was connected with the fact that already the change had been implemented before the memo was written?
Chairperson, that's exactly what I had also noted, that the letter was dated the 1st of August.
19?
First and then signed on the 19th.
Oh, okay.
It was signed on the 19th, but it looks like it had been written a while back and kept, and maybe waiting for the right time, and then it was given to me on the 19th. But it was saying retrospectively.
Yes.
I didn't know what it means because I had been managing that section from the 1st to the 19th. I didn't know what the status of the things that I've signed between that time, whether they are irregular or I will be discharged for signing things. I didn't know. I didn't quite understand it.
Or maybe what happened is it was prepared on the 1st of August, but didn't get ready for signing until much later, or he might not have got time to sign it until much later.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. In fact, one of the things was an internal communication also was moved to his office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Ms. Williams, just to clarify then, when did the change occur? When were these 70% odd of your functions? And we'll come back to that percentage in a moment. But as I understand your statement, you said with effect from this memo and this instruction from Minister Mutambi, effectively 70% of your portfolio was taken away from you. As a matter of fact, when did that occur? Did it happen at the 1st of August, or did it happen after the 19th of August, when this internal memo is dated?
Chairperson, ideally it should have taken effect from the 19th. But I think I want to mention the fact that the situation, or rather my situation was so bad such that people were being managed individually on their own. They were called to the DG's office. So even if you were to ask me when, they probably were already interacting with my division as they please.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. If we can then go to the correspondence that bears out the evidence that you've given to the chair about you raising concern with this internal memo. Your letter appears at page 39.1. That is the document which, Chair, I asked on Friday be inserted to the
Yes.
bundle because it had been erroneously omitted.
Yes.
Ms. Williams, as I see it, this is a letter dated the 27th of September 2016. I note addressed to the Honourable Minister Mutambi. And it is a letter, as I have it, that you sent to her. Is that correct?
That's correct.
If you go to the bottom of page 39.1, the last paragraph there, in the preceding paragraphs, you've recorded the internal memo that you received, and you have referenced the instruction that is apparent from that internal memo that Mr. Dipoko received from the minister. And you go on in the last paragraph, and I quote, to say the following: whilst I appreciate that the prerogative of rearranging the department's functions resides with the minister, I expect it to be treated fairly in conveying the minister's decision. It is my understanding that when the conditions of employment change, the employee should be consulted. and then you say, I was never consulted. Do you confirm that?
Yes, I confirm that.
You go on over the page, Ms. Williams, at page 39.2, to talk about these 72% of your functions that were removed from you. Can you please give the chair a sense of what that meant for your position? And I note later on in the letter you talk about it having rendered it redundant. Please take us through that.
Chairperson, what it meant, I hope I'll get it right, I'll say it correctly. I was being paid as a Deputy Director General for doing all these functions that were not happening to me. And yeah, I think, Chairperson, if you allow me to say what I want to say, I think if you indulge me,
Yes.
because I think at this point, I think Minister Mtambi, or rather this woman, I'm really being sorry to say what I want to say. Minister Mtambi had ripped my scars of torture completely. I think when I was writing this letter, the effects of my torture were back. Chairperson, I was no longer sleeping. I had nightmares. I was reliving my situation. My facial twitches were back. I had panic attacks. I saw torture going through my body again. I never thought in this government people can do such things. I was tortured for weeks, and Mtambi did the same thing to my body. And that's why I wrote this letter, as a way of trying to get her to understand what she was doing. One, she was cheating the state, because basically I was being paid because she wanted that procurement at all costs. She wanted to steal at all costs. That removing of all those functions, it was a ploy to remove the finance and procurement away from me. They knew that they have removed me from doing cabinet work. I was going to be a nuisance, and they decided that the procurement and the finances must be removed from this woman. And that's basically what they did. I had to contend with those scars back in my system. I couldn't say to anyone what I was going through. I had to be assisted by colleagues at work, Mr. Simakane and Zukiswa, who made it their problem that every morning they come and check on me. My sister had to move in my house, because at that point, I was scared of going to bed because I thought the nightmares will come back. I started hearing those keys of my torture. That's all.
Ms. Williams, if you need a break,
Please.
yes, we'll take a break. Will 10 minutes be enough?
That's fine.
Okay, we'll take a 10 minutes break. It's the time is 6 minutes past 12. Okay, I'll just say we'll come back at 20 past 12.
Thank you, Chair.
We adjourn.